All right, so I just started the recording. I got just a few seconds until 6:30.
Andrew, I'll call on you during public comment. I checked our list. Paul is actually the appointee for you guys.
Got it. He asked me to attend.
Oh, he did? All right. All right. Well, then let's promote you and to serve as his spokesperson. Can we do that, Andy?
Sure.
Sure thing.
Thank you.
I did notice a few others attending in the audience, so I promoted them accordingly.
Thank you. Okay, we'll get started in a minute. I just want to give another couple minutes. Well, no, another 30 seconds. Okay, I think we can get started. So this is our fourth meeting, as you can see on the slide. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to take roll call from the voting members, and then I'm going to turn it over to Sasaki to present their slide deck, because there were some items that we raised with them at our last meeting on September 16th. And then, of course, they've received comments. I'm then going to go right to public comment and then bring it back to the group. And my goal tonight, I really hope we could have a successful motion from the voting members to recommend approval to the full council. So, you know, if there are amendments and so on, we'll need to do motion practice on that. So first, let me just take roll call. Councillor Connell, I know, is absent. Councillor Zeid?
Here. I'm here.
Yep. Councillor Shand?
Here.
And Councillor McCauley?
Here.
Okay. And just for everyone's information, Andrew Casson, who's head of the Harbor Commission, is sitting in for our Harbor Master, Paul Hogg, who's absent. Okay, go ahead. Take it away, Kate.
Kate, yeah, this is Andy. I just wanted to welcome Kate and Letitia back from Sasaki. They have been doing a great amount of work over the last couple of months, and in particular in the last couple of weeks. They just wanted to provide an overview tonight, from me as to what they're going to do. So at any rate, we're going to update you on some of the design details. But the most particular one I think that we've had some success on in the last couple of weeks is having a discussion about sea level rise and how both the Bulkhead project, a separate project but very connected in its location, and the park project itself both need to adapt because of sea level rise and what the implications might be. So we've looked at that in great detail with the consultants for both projects, with members of the resiliency committee, and we've come to some conclusions, essentially that we have the ability to phase in the improvements that are needed to raise the bulkhead wall, which is the primary point of protection, if you will. We are planning on retrofitting and protecting the bulkhead, extending the work that was done several years back. But we are not precluded in doing that project. We wouldn't be precluded from adding height to that in the future. And that was one of the concerns that we had. So in essence, what you'll see in here is that Sasaki has designed the park to adapt to sea level rise and to raise as much of the park as possible out of that future flood zone, if you will, while recognizing that we do have to meet the boardwalk and we have to meet surrounding grades. And so we've, as you'll see from some of the diagrams, the excellent diagrams they have in here of both the site, cross sections and so forth, how that will be addressed, and how the city has the ability to incrementally make adjustments over time to adapt to sea level rise without necessarily impacting or adversely impacting the public experience. There's also a couple of other diagrams to focus on a few areas that there were some comments on, service and access, for instance. And then there are a few other areas that we got some feedback on in general, both from the ad hoc committee and the general public. And they'd like to touch on that as well. But again, I think the sea level rise discussion was one of the more substantive items left from the last meeting that we wanted to ensure that before we move forward with this schematic plan, that it adequately addresses sea level rise. And John Eric White, the city engineer, who I believe is planning to be with us tonight, I will keep an eye out. He has confirmed that he's comfortable with the plan. He thinks that they've done a good job on the grading. They did also make a tweak in the last couple of weeks to raise one of the areas a little further. But that's, I think, as good as can be done, recognizing that the project limits here do not go in infinitely east and west. So with that, we'll move to the next slide. And yep, go ahead, Kate, sorry.
All right, so we just put this refined plan in here just to remind everybody where we were about a couple of weeks ago when we shared with you the refined plan. And in general, the big moves remain similar. And as Andy said, what we're here to do tonight is really provide some additional information and share a couple of tweaks to this plan. If there is a need to review the plan and the illustrative material in more detail, we also have that material we can open after this. But as Andy said, we're really focused on the questions and comments that were raised and how we can provide some good answers and tweaks to the plan to accommodate those pieces of feedback. So the bulk of the presentation is going to focus here on this question of sea level rise, which came up in the last meeting. Letitia tonight has a cold, so I'm going to do the bulk of the talking, but she'll probably interrupt with pieces that that are in her brain even more than mine. So feel free to jump in, Letitia. What we're going to do is we're going to talk first about the existing conditions on site. Sea level rise and tidal and storm flooding are not new to Newburyport. You all have done quite a bit of work around resilience and have a resilience plan in place. And so we want to acknowledge that work and also acknowledge the ways in which sea level rise is already predicted to affect your community, even if you do no work on the waterfront. So this is just a diagram. It's showing the existing condition on the east side, cutting through the existing parking area on the east side of the park as it exists today. You can see that mean high water, MHHW, which really stands for the average high tide. So high tide that happens twice daily is currently hitting at about 4.5 feet. So a little bit of a ways just below the edge of the boardwalk, which is sitting at 8.5 feet. In the future, so with predicted sea level rise, we've looked at several models of this and have a consultant on our team, VHB, who's really been helping us understand what the best models for sea level rise to use are. The future predicted high tide, so this again is happening twice daily in 2070, is at 8.7 feet. So you can see that that will inundate the boardwalk itself and portions of the access to the boardwalk on the east side. And then not shown here on the west side of the park near the boat ramp, there are areas of the actual landmass that would also be in that daily tidal zone, again, twice a day by 2070. And you can see here in this map that same condition, again, on the existing site, showing that by 2070, there would be some areas of flooding on the west side of the park. Certainly all of the areas right along the shoreline at the boardwalk would be in the tidal zone. And then more areas in the tidal zone by 2080, 2090, and 2100. So then the second piece of the picture when it comes to sea level rise and living in a coastal community is storms. So this is showing the flooding extent for the 100-year storm, which is what that means is that there's a 1% chance of that storm happening every year. And you can see that that elevation that has been set by FEMA for flooding is at 12 feet. So already today on the east side of the park area, you have flooding that occurs, on the order of, 4 feet or so at the lower elevations of the park to all the way back towards the street at lower elevations, or lower depths of flooding. Really the condition as you go towards 2070 with sea level rise, that projected storm surge gets up to about 17 feet, which puts that whole landmass under more like five and above levels of flooding. So quite a bit of flooding already predicted to happen on the site. This map here really just puts that into context on the existing site. And what it's mapping is in 2070, when there's a storm, so during the 100-year storm, the depth of water that is expected across this site. So you can see it's really quite deep, closer on the lower parts of the site, which are currently the boardwalk, and closer down to the water's edge, up to about 1 foot of water. And you can see that that inundation comes all the way in, kind of past the street in some places. So these are models that are already available, widely circulated, and definitely trusted when it comes to coastal resilience planning throughout Massachusetts and beyond. And what we've done is we've applied those to the design of the site. So this again is that site design. What we're going to do now is walk you through a series of diagrams that just shows, if nothing else is done, if the park itself is the only thing that gets implemented from a design perspective, how that same kind of tidal inundation and flooding from storms would affect the park itself. And then we can talk about future improvements as well. So what this diagram is showing, this is again, the park design with the designed grading plan, which has a couple of limits. It does have to tie into existing site conditions at the existing Market Landing Park, as well as all along the boardwalk condition and at the edges of the site. So there are some limits in terms of how much we can raise the grade of the site because of the surrounding conditions we're stitching to. What this is showing is the average daily high water level. So twice daily, there's a high tide. This is showing that average high tide in 2080, 2090, and 2100. You can see that there is some flooding of the site that starts to occur between 2070 and 2080 because of sea level rise. Again, this is twice daily flooding that is expected if no other measures are taken. If you only implement the park design and nothing else. These are the areas that you could expect to start seeing daily, they're essentially in the tidal zone. So they're getting wet twice a day. And what this does is just sort of back off of that and explain a little bit about what time horizons you can start to expect things to get wet, which I think is a useful way to think about it. So this is showing today's daily high tide, twice daily, water gets to that elevation of 4.5 feet. And currently that's really held back. There's a little bit of where it comes in at the boat ramp, but otherwise it's held at the edge of that bulkhead wall. In 2050, the highest astronomical tide, HAT is what that stands for, highest astronomical tide, which occurs about twice a year, would bring water to this contour 8.7. And then also by 2070, that same area is getting wet twice daily as part of the average high tide. And again, this drawing doesn't illustrate any additional improvements except changes to the park and the grading of the park. By 2070, twice a year, the highest astronomical tide is going to bring tidal floodwaters into a greater extent of the park. And you can see the ways in which that's happening. And again, no other changes are happening here in this scenario to the boardwalk or to the areas in which the park really has to stitch into that existing condition. And then finally, we just wanted to map that 1% chance every year of a 100-year storm. So those base flood elevations are set at, sorry, this is set at 17. This number is wrong. Excuse me for that. So that FEMA base flood elevation at elevation 17 in 2070 would be inundating a really significant portion of the site. But again, that's the 100-year storm. So 1% chance every year of that happening. And this is again illustrating the amount of flooding if no other protective measures happen in adjacent properties or along the water's edge. So what this diagram is showing is the potential for additional improvements beyond the improvements that are just within the scope of the park expansion, and what kinds of things that the city could consider in the future to further protect the park and city resources behind the park. So the first thing to note is that Future efforts to raise the bulkhead as well as the boardwalk could help with direct inundation from the river. So all of these areas that are really directly getting flooded from the river could be accommodated or could be brought out of the floodplain with changes to the bulkhead wall and raising that boardwalk. And minor changes to the park grading could accommodate a flush and accessible connection to those future raised assets. It's also important to note that a solution needs to be considered for areas adjacent to the park. So these are the properties to the east and the west of the park, which are currently not controlled by the city, but which bring tidal floodwaters in from the east and the west. So really having great policies and starting to think through the protective measures that happen to make a continuous barrier along the shoreline will be important to ensure that floodwaters don't come in from the east and the west to inundate portions of the park. And then finally, there is some additional infrastructure which could help to address non-tidal and overland flooding from Market Square. Some of these improvements are already being considered for the implementation of the park, and there could be additional measures in the future that would help with some of the flooding that occurs from storm events, rain, to Market Square. Andy, do you want to talk through the bulkhead improvements project?
Yeah, thank you. So picking up on one of the comments I had made earlier, and Kate has just covered how the park project is adapting and addressing sea level rise to the greatest extent we have, possible right now, meeting adjacent grades. This diagram actually comes from the base of it anyway, comes from the civil engineer who's been working on the bulkhead design. And what you're seeing there is essentially the bulkhead wall is that concrete structure. Yep, thank you, Kate. And then at the top of that, there's a cap. That's a concrete cap there. What's shown in white there on the outside edge is an FRP, or the fiberglass reinforced material protecting the bulkhead wall itself. So that's similar to what we did on the western side of the central waterfront already. The bulkhead project that we've been talking about recently has been to extend that work across the rest of the central embayment and then the eastern section of the bulkhead wall. But one of the concerns that was raised here by the city engineer, and as we discussed with folks, is if we are doing this work now, are we hurting ourselves by only having to redo this work later on, essentially to address sea level rise? If you think about those blue lines there, those contours coming up with sea level rise increasing over time. And what the civil engineer essentially explained to us is that, and generally speaking, in all cases, we're going to be building off the existing structure. So what has been pointed out is that we have the ability to raise that bulkhead wall now, but we also, in doing so, what we would be doing is essentially just extending that cap, and that could be done either now or at a later date by essentially, bolting or anchoring that down with epoxy bolts essentially into the concrete. So there's the ability to do that either now or in the future, as the city may be able to do based on funding and based on its own desired timeline. One of the concerns that was raised by the Waterfront Trust as we in the last couple of weeks, as we had discussed the pros and cons of various options, is if that wall is brought up further than essentially where you see the person sitting and their view out the water's edge. There are folks that sit there on those benches, their knees under the railings, and there are folks that even just standing there, they may have a sense of a loss of their experience, essentially, or a portion of their experience. You see the lower two red lines and the water view that they have there would essentially go away, and the ability to sit on that, those benches there sitting out on the water's edge would also go away in the near term, even though the intent here is to address a concern that's a little further out in terms of a couple of decades. We do need to address these concerns, and I would certainly not dismiss those. But what was pointed out here is that we're not hurting ourselves if we do a lower elevation right now with the protection of the bulkhead wall that exists today, and then add to that height as needed going forward. So as you can see here in this diagram, what you've got is the raised boardwalk. That's something that would build off the existing structure. And that was one of our questions for the civil engineer. Would be having to redo everything, or would you be building off the existing structure? And his estimation was that even, decades in the future, we would still be building off of the existing subsurface structure. We would obviously go down to whatever was reliable at that point. Might be rotted, but we would go down to the concrete and steel and then build up from there. Same thing with the bulkhead wall. We could extend off of there either now or in the future. And the same thing with the pilings. We can extend those or have new ones placed at a higher elevation. So we're not really hurting ourselves if we were to do the bulkhead wall as designed without the raising of it to essentially reach just above the railing there in this diagram. You sort of get an idea of what that might look like if the boardwalk wasn't raised. So that was one of our primary concerns. Jordy and I had talked about for the purposes of keeping all our options open to do that raising of the bulkhead wall sooner. What we could do is essentially bid the bulkhead project with an an alternate bid that the bidders would essentially tell us how much more it would cost us in bidding, and if we were to sign a contract with them to raise that bulkhead wall a little further. So that's our option to essentially decide if we want to do it in the next couple of years as this bulkhead work is being done, to do that as well. But there are pros and cons to doing it. One is cost, obviously. Another one is that loss of experience or change of experience. And the general sense is, I understand it, I would defer to Wilbur and anyone from the trust, but my understanding is, at least from members of the trust, is, and some from the design team, and I think, I would share that concern, is that we may not benefit from losing that particular portion of the view right now, even though we do need it in the future. So we're happy that we have the ability to do it in phases. We're happy that we have the ability to even add it to the upcoming bulkhead project if we so select and we have the funding available. But we also know that we have our options going forward to raise the bulkhead wall, to raise the boardwalk, and so forth, without feeling that we've thrown money away, or have to rip something out. And then the purple lines, I'll just add, is the just showing how Sasaki Associates recognizes that we can essentially adjust the grades as is necessary for accessibility to meet the boardwalk as needed in the future. But as shown, as Kate had shown in some of the earlier slides, they've raised as much of the park as they can while still meeting the existing grades. And I think that this overall is essentially the best balancing act that we can do between the various costs involved, the infrastructure that we have, the timelines of sea level rise, and so forth. But that is, in a nutshell, the explanation of how we're proceeding to raise the bulkhead wall, but to do it at the right time, and recognizing that we're not necessarily hurting ourselves if we do this incrementally.
Mm-hmm. So last but not least, we wanted to just acknowledge that, especially during a storm scenario, we showed you some pretty significant inundation of the park itself. And remember that storm scenario is really a 1% chance every year. So 1 in 100 years roughly that could occur. But we're pretty familiar with planning parks to be occasionally inundated. And there are some really tried and true methods to ensure that a park can get wet and be resilient to that flood condition and emerge in the same condition that it went into the flood. So we just have 2 examples here. The Chicago Riverwalk, which is a Sasaki project that has really transformed Chicago's relationship with the river, was really designed to flood. And so the Chicago River annually floods about twice a year, and all of the areas along the Riverwalk are designed to meet that inundation and handle it. And the ways in which it does that is it keeps infrastructure out of that floodplain and employs a lot of durable materials that can really easily be cleaned. The pictures here are showing a record flood in 2015, and the whole park was cleaned and reopened within about 12 hours. So it's really a pretty simple operation when you plan well for it, and the park can be resilient to it. The second park we just wanted to note that is a recent project of ours that was designed to flood again is Cincinnati's Smale Riverfront Park. The nice thing about this in the context of Market Landing Park is that it is a much softer park than Chicago. And so you can see that the balance of green areas to paved areas and program space is really similar in lots of ways. And so again, this park was designed to flood. This is the record flood. It was a 100-year storm that flooded the Ohio River. The park was inundated for several days, actually, in this case, which is unlikely to be the case ever at Market Landing Park, where the flood scenarios are more like a couple of hours of high tide. Perhaps, you have to endure a couple of high tide cycles in a big storm. But this park was underwater for several days. And there are significant measures that had been taken in the design process to ensure, again, that infrastructure was out of the floodplain, the materials were durable, and that in some cases barriers were installed on the upriver side to prevent any flotsam from taking out structures. When the Ohio River floods, all kinds of things like old refrigerators and cars come floating down the river. So that isn't the case in Newburyport, but I think we want to acknowledge that Parks can be designed to withstand this kind of flooding. And there are specific considerations that we can make to ensure that Market Landing Park can be resilient when floodwaters inundate the park in the future. So we have a couple of diagrams here also to answer questions about service and commercial fishing and ADA access that came up at our last meeting. And so we want to make sure that we all are on the same page with understanding some of these key moves that have been made in the design and planning of the park. So I want to first start by noting there were several questions last time we met about ADA access and ensuring that the park could be universally accessible. And we want to be clear that that is a core tenet of our design for this park, to ensure that all park pathways and gathering spaces are universally accessible. Whether you're using a wheelchair, pushing a stroller, or riding a bike, you can get there the same way as any able-bodied person on feet. So all of the bold lines here, as well as all of the dashed lines, are showing universally accessible pathways. These are pathways that are either flat or sloped at a level that doesn't even require ramps or railings. So these, again, are just universally accessible ways to arrive at the park. And you can see that all of the gathering spaces, which are shown in yellow, are accessible by those pathways. There is one area where there are steps in order to retain some of the grade as the shared use path drops down to meet the existing grade at the boardwalk. But both the upper and the lower levels of that would be accessible so that there could be companion seating and opportunities to enjoy both experiences, no matter what your level of mobility is. The second thing we wanted to note here was the everyday vehicular circulation. So you can see those two access points from the street and the ways in which cars can move fluidly around to find parking spaces and then move back out of the site. And the ways in which those would be accessed by those pathways we just showed you. There were several questions that came up last time we met about the circulation and access specifically for the Harbor Master facility. We understand that there's a fuel truck, which is one of the largest vehicles that comes in there on a regular basis. And so this pathway is showing the outer extents. The bold lines are the outer extents of a fuel truck that would be able to turn and drive through there. And so you can see that we're studying the way in which that wheel pathway, as well as the outer extents of the truck, could be accommodated along a paved route for that turnaround and backing into the Harbor Master facility. Smaller trucks could use the same access route and be able to make those turns even more efficiently. We also wanted to note that fire truck circulation has been well coordinated with the fire chief. What we're providing here is a route for the fire trucks to get actually to the embayment where they need to be in order to fight fires that may occur on any boats that are at the dock. And so we've provided that access via the shared use path, as well as routes through the parking area. And again, the solid outer line depicts the outermost edges of a vehicle as it's maneuvering through that space. And you can see we're making every effort to ensure that that outer vehicle movement remains on a paved area, which can really accommodate it and be resilient to that vehicular load over the long term. It's also worth noting that we understand that the embayment is used as the winter area for certain commercial boating activities. And so for specific loading and unloading of that use, we could also imagine that specific parking and loading access could occur on these same vehicular routes that the fire truck is using. And finally, there were a few questions last time, as well as in the comments we received, about the width of that shared use path and how it functions specifically for vehicular access and fire truck and emergency access. So here we're just noting on that same rendering that you saw last time, the fact that there is a 10-foot wide paved width, which is appropriate for a fire truck, as well as that everyday use of the shared use pathway. And then there's a 2-foot shoulder. In some cases, that shoulder would be paved and rated for vehicular loading. And in some cases, that shoulder is reinforced turf. So again, it provides the resilience to the occasional loading of a fire truck and other wheeled vehicles, but it also can appear grassy and feel soft and park-like on a daily basis. So finally, we wanted to note that there were a few topics. So those were the two big ones that we heard from you all about, as well as saw in some of the comments that came through, but there were some additional topics. We just wanted to make sure that that we all had understood and addressed all of the comments that had come through about the plan. So we received 24 specific comments through the online portal in response to the refined plan. And I think it's worth noting that at this point in the process, it's really typical to see people who are very passionate on one side or the other respond, and most of the public who had been active in the process earlier start to fall away. So again, about 50% of those comments are positive, sort of cheering on the design or neutral, and about 50% of them are really specifically focused on a couple of questions or pieces of critique about elements of the design. You can see on the right just some of the words that come out and some of those key themes about bikes and pedestrians, about fishing and pervious pavements, about trees, and then that sort of overall sentiment that there's a lot of thoughtful and visionary ideas landing for the city of Newburyport that folks are excited about. There were sort of 4 themes that we want to note that came out, and especially in some of those comments that are critiquing the design, and we want to be sure we really address those. In the top left here, there were a number of comments about additional bike racks, and we wanted to note that these can absolutely be accommodated within the design of the park, and we'll continue to study the best locations and the best numbers of those as we get into the construction document phase. So thank you for those comments that came through about that. On the top right here, we wanted to note that there were a couple of very passionate comments that came through about the alignment of the shared use path and whether or not that path should come through at the head of the embayment or not. I would say there were an equal number. These comments were balanced by an equal number of folks expressing their support for that idea and the ways in which it would provide a safe balance of pedestrian and bicycle use of the park. So we are moving ahead, assuming that the direction of the ad hoc committee to bring that shared use path through at the head of the embayment remains unchanged, but we'd be happy to hear additional comments on that. Finally, there were a number of comments about sustainability and operations, and then also some comments about the restroom and visitor center style. And so we will continue to address those and explore different options during the design development and construction documents phase, and feel confident that we can hear the comments and incorporate those into the design. Finally, there was one additional question that you all had raised at the last meeting about additional maintenance costs, which could be expected related to the essentially the acquisition and operation of a new park within the Newburyport Park system. And so that we sort of are offering 3 ways to think about this. The first on the left is local precedent. So the Waterfront Trust has reported really a range of operating costs over the last bunch of years, everything from about $30,000 a year to about $85,000 a year. And the area of the existing waterfront park and the new expansion of that are roughly the same. So one can imagine that the costs would be pretty similar to what the Waterfront Trust is already paying. Another way to look at this is Sasaki works with parks systems all over the country, and we occasionally work with operations and management consultants. And so we've borrowed a few numbers of typical park maintenance costs from other projects and applied those here. You can see we have a park maintenance cost for lawn per acre, for hardscape per acre, and for ornamental planting beds. These are the primary features of the new park in Newburyport. And when we apply those numbers to the quantities of different landscape types in the park design as it currently stands, we get about $30,000 a year in maintenance costs. So that's at the low end of what the Waterfront Trust is reporting paying, but certainly something to sort of consider as part of your operational budgets moving forward. And then finally, for the restroom facility, the size and scope and program of that facility is more or less unchanged from the existing building you have, except the fixtures will be new and the mechanical systems will be new. So we're imagining that there really is no additional cost associated with maintaining those features for the city. Andy, do you want to talk next steps here?
Yeah, thank you, Kate. And I'll defer obviously to the chair of the committee, but where we are right now is, as we discussed at our last meeting, is Sasaki circled back based on feedback with the schematic plan that they've developed. You can see we went through several different concept plans that weighed various different issues that needed to be melded together into a refined conceptual plan. You can see the where here. So we've come to the completion of the schematic plan. There are still some miscellaneous details, of course, that need to be worked out at a finer grain. But for the most part, I think what we've seen is consensus for the plan to move ahead, per the design that Sasaki's put together. The Waterfront Trust has confirmed that they support the plan. There are a few comments they had added. The Harbor Commission, same thing. When I spoke to Paul Hogg, the harbor master, he had indicated that they do want to take a look at the dimensions where the crane is, but they're very confident that that's just a minor question of just making sure the exact dimensions are right. But they have every confidence in the project as it's been designed, and they don't have issues with access, if you will. With that, I think what we're hoping for is that the committee here can confirm that Sasaki has done a good job on the schematic design that we've all been looking to bring together, so that they can then go ahead and do detailed design plans suitable for construction. We're obviously going to have more involvement of this ad hoc committee in review of the park design, the Waterfront Trust, obviously, and all the stakeholders that we've had involved during the design process that Sasaki's done thus far. But what we do need to do is, if there is agreement on the schematic plan, or if there's any further discussion to be had about what they've developed tonight, what we're hoping for is agreement that it makes sense to move ahead with the full design of this particular project, so that when the funding is available, and we're efforting that from various different sources, components of the park, or hopefully the entire park at once, can be constructed. And so if we do not keep the design process moving forward, they will not have enough time to put the plans together such that we can then do bidding for construction. It's obviously not logical to assume that we'd be able to do construction next year. But I do think if we work hard, we can get and Sasaki has given the go-ahead, they will have the time to do the refined plans and to look at all the spark grades and things like that go into depths of pipes and things like that. There are more refined details than we need to be bothered with as a committee. But if they move ahead with that, they can have time into next year to do that, circling back with us, resolving any discrepancies or concerns anyone has, and having a bid package that's ready to go. We're obviously trying to get the funding lining up, but the earliest we could realistically, I think, do construction would be 2023. And the hope is to make sure that we do not lose traction in the time frame that it takes to do all the work involved, given the great work that Sasaki has done to prepare a plan that melts together all the different public policy questions we've had about the central waterfront over time. Where does the path go? How much parking to keep? How to distribute it? And so forth. So with that, I guess we would turn it back to the chair of the committee.
Yes, thank you. I see that Mayor has joined us. So Mayor, did you want to say something? We're going to bring it back after public comment.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that. I apologize. I had a different time for this meeting on my calendar, so I apologize for jumping in late. A couple things. In terms of where the dumpster is now for Sea Level Restaurant, that was a concern raised by the restaurant owner. And obviously that's really important function for the restaurant. I've also had numerous concerns about trucks coming in down, if you're facing sea level on the right there, which would be Ferry Wharf. No, it's not marked. Next to the firehouse, that path there, that is where oftentimes cars will come in inappropriately, or they've been having deliveries come in and taking out the street signal there. And so I would ask that there would be a way for deliveries, if possible, to come in on the by the dumpster. There's a brick path there now. Could that be opened up so that it could be a way for them to get deliveries in, as opposed to the system they're using now? I just think it makes a lot more sense to direct truck traffic, and for settings for this firehouse stage, they could all come in versus by the dumpster, that dirt lot. I just would like you to think about that.
Yeah, Mayor, if I could, we actually discussed this earlier today even, and there's agreement that we can adjust the trail there to provide a better access to the dumpster location, which is being maintained. There are some mature trees there and a bit of a grading change that might preclude us making a full width path, if you will, like elsewhere in the park. So what we're trying to do is make sure that they still have the access they do to the dumpster area, possibly more convenient, obviously, than they do today. It wasn't entirely clear that we'd be able to get vehicles through there, which I think was one of the questions to the building, but rather we can.
Wharf Way, you mean that way?
Correct. Yeah, that would be potentially problematic.
But where your hand is, where you just work, where that parking lot is, why couldn't they come and like?
Well, those spaces there are associated with that building, right? They're not part of the city's property there, and they dead end at the end of that pavement. So we'd be going right into the grading there. So we're going to work with Sasaki to do what we can to make access for them, but it may not be an accessible path. It would be something that's providing them better access to get to the dumpster and to the paved area. But it wouldn't necessarily be a
Dumpster would happen from them coming out of the restaurant to access the dumpster. So that's, I don't think is as big of an issue, but if you could find a way that they could come in through there, they don't necessarily have to be close, but you put the hand truck on the path and you pull it up into the firehouse. The same thing with sets. I just really want to discourage the continued use of that brick walkway, even though it's it's wide beside the firehouse, to have vehicular traffic going through there. I think that's important. The other question I had was, I know that the former chair of the NRA was a bit perturbed about where the shared use path went, and felt it was important in terms of separating sections of the park or plan. Did you have a chance to talk about that at all in terms of his position?
Mayor, we haven't taken public comment yet, so we're going to take public comment, then we're going to come back to the panel.
Okay, this was something he said to me individually and what he presented before the city council meeting last time. So I don't know if he's even on, but I just, he was pretty adamant that was the determined place for the shared use path and his rationale in terms of separating the space. And I just didn't know if you had considered that comment.
Well, we have in the past, but we'll again, we'll once we get done with public comment, we will again.
Okay.
We'll
thank you, Jared.
Sure. Okay, so those in the attendees list, I have 7 people. Please know that we do have written correspondence from Wilbur Schenk and also Rick Tainter. But if you wish to comment tonight on the record, just raise your hand electronically, give your name and address, 2 minutes, the usual drill. Anybody want to comment of you 7 attendees? No. Okay, I'm not seeing any, so I'm gonna close public comment, bring it back to the panel. I think to set the stage, for the panel, I mean, you just heard the presentation from Sasaki, you heard comments from the project manager, planning director Port. You heard comments from the mayor, specifically about loading and trash removal for Firehouse tenant, which is a restaurant, and then comments from the former NRA chair, Andrew Sidford. And Andrew Sidford did present before the whole council at our last meeting. So all of the councilors are familiar with his comment. I mean, basically, he was arguing for the separate bicycle path that loops back by the firehouse. So, and everyone also got the letters, so you should have copies from Captain Letourneau, Rick Tainter, another captain, I believe, Captain George French, and an email from Wilbur Schenk on behalf of the Waterfront Trust. So that's a lot before you. With that, I'd like to open it up, and remember where I'm headed on this is we were referred from the city council proposed order 284, which would endorse the conceptual plan. I can put that up on the screen when people need to see it. So who's first? Andrew Casson, go ahead. I think you're self-muted, but go right ahead, Andrew.
Sorry. We as a Harbor Commission met yesterday to go over the entire conceptual plan. And it was asked of me to kind of share what the commission's thoughts were. And some of this may be appropriate or not, but I just wanted to get it out there very quickly. As a commission, we believe that everything, the way it's laid out, is excellent, and we like it tremendously. Some of the things that Andy Port, and there's only 3 real bullet points we put down. One is, as Andy, as you recommended or mentioned, was crane access, which within the design process was turning radius, weight, outrigger access, the width, and visibility of the crane. Which one of the things there was, there's a shared use path between the Harbor Masters Plaza and Ferry Wharf, in which if the width was appropriate, we think the crane could drive right through there with the right stuff. Second, we will measure the docks and provide the exact square footage when the docks come out between November 4th and 7th to give you actual square footage of what is required for storage, keeping the docks no higher than four docks high. The third, very simply, was the recommendation of safety and signage. And as we talked about a fuel truck before, we basically built it on, I know there's been a lot of people talking about an 18-wheeler going through the Harbor Masters Plaza, but we basically looked and wanted to make sure that a large fire truck could access. The only other thing we discussed was someplace within the park or the Harbor Masters Plaza. There is currently a monument in the park related to the birthplace of the Coast Guard from George Cashman. And we just would like, if it's taken into the design consideration, keeping that, or having some place dedicated within the Harbor Masters Plaza or the park that Newburyport is the birthplace of the Coast Guard.
Thank you, Andrew. That's very helpful.
Thank you.
Next, I have John Eric White, the city engineer, who's muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you. I want to commend Kate's team. Excellent coverage on resiliency since the last meeting. It was always on their plate, but I do appreciate the effort that you put into the presentation. So thank you for the conceptual plan via email this past week. I took a look at it today. I sent Andy Port and some members and Kate and Councilor Eigerman my comments. The grading is excellent. I like it a lot. I have no comments on the grading itself. So moving forward, I totally propose we move forward. I did throw out a thought of having another member of the Resilience Committee, because I'm on the Resilience Committee. I do feel confident that I speak for the Resilience Committee that the grading plan that we have in front of us meets our needs of the resiliency. I think they did a phenomenal job. The area to the left that gets inundated, it's not a big area. Area to the right that gets inundated, not a big area. We knew that. That's the way life's going to be. In 2060, we're just going to have to start raising it. That's just the way life is. As far as the bulkhead, on that note, as far as the bulkhead, Andy brought up the fact that the engineer for the bulkhead is going to raise the cap. I do highly recommend that we do that now. The adult is a fine means of doing that. That's fine. I urge the mayor, I urge city council, I urge everyone to help find some grant money to pay for that now. If we can put the cap higher, not on the diagram that Andy showed, but the engineer provided another diagram that is more similar to the exact cap that is there now. It just, I'm sorry, the proposed, yeah, right there. the proposed cap that's there now is your standard proposed cap for the fiberglass sheet pile. Raising that to the top of the timber bench where that silhouette person is sitting provides a lot of benefit. It's just a little different design than the rectangular concrete filler material that Andy had shown, which came from the engineer. So all I'm saying here, you guys, is that this cap, another option the engineer has is raising that cap about 2.5 feet. So the top of that cap is where the top of the seat is, the top of the timber bench. To resolve that, in my opinion, quite easy. We can put up a new pipe rail so they can still sit on that. Their feet will extend a little bit further. That's okay. Maybe we put a pipe rail on the cap. Those are things that I want the Waterfront Trust to not deter from the practicality of, we need to move forward as much as we can on resiliency now, because we're going to spend a lot of money citywide on resiliency, and not doing this because of someone not being able to sit is, in my opinion, not the way to go. I'm not saying the Waterfront Trust is saying that that's the way to go, but I like to take that completely off the table because there's ways around that. So that I just want to throw that out. I think that's very important. And I think the boaters will benefit from a raised cap, even though it's only a couple feet. There'll be surge and the boats will be rising and the lines will be tightening up. And I just think it's a good idea. So whatever we can do now will help. I want to make a comment on the east. Let me stay on this note. Over by Tuscan Grill, the comment I gave to via email today. They have Sasaki has 3 parallel parking spots next to the boat ramp at Tuscan Grill. And Andy, you didn't happen to take my sketch to be able to present to this meeting?
I do have a copy of that. I can pull that up.
This will just take a minute, Counselor Ackerman. It's all it is replacing the 3 parallel parking spaces with 7 head-in parking. And it doesn't really change much from the layout, and doesn't change hardly anything for the access to the waterfront parking on the west lot. Generally, I'd like to get people's opinion, but a lot of people go there and they park head in, they sit there for lunch. It's a kind of a popular spot. It's easy. You drive in, and right now there's 4. A lot of us park where you aren't supposed to park in front of the boat ramp because you're only sitting there for temporarily. So I kind of like this. I was curious what people on the committee think of this.
This is Andy, if I could. One of the balancing points that were raised in relation to this was the distance between the cars and the shared use path. The idea of having cars coming and going quite frequently from that space and potentially having their bumpers go over the curb line. We do have a guardrail over at Michael's that is along the shared use path there, but that's not obviously the preferred landscaping, if you will, next to a path or a buffer. There is the ability to potentially fit these cars in there, but there was a concern about that. And then the ability for folks, and I'll defer the Waterfront Trust or parking clerk or others who may want to weigh in, but there has been, at least to my understanding, some concern that we maintain or have at least a few spaces associated with the park, even as expanded, and we removed some spaces where folks could nose in towards the water's edge. We're trying to balance some issues here in this very tight space where we can't go any further than the ramp down to the water, which is right down in here. The shared use path has to dead end here to be on level ground, and yet there's only enough space here to have a travel aisle and then some spaces, right? So the question here is, do we try to have nose in spaces and have it right tight against the path, or do we try to have some sort of a landscape strip and then put them perpendicular or parallel, I should say, parked? They may not be nosed in, but it's a little bit preferable, I think, from a park experience or a path experience. So that's kind of the issue here, that John Eric had done this sketch to show how spaces could nose in. The one thing I think that it's missing from consideration on this sketch anyway is just the idea of what kind of buffer goes between the cars that are coming and going, because I would imagine we wouldn't want to have it tight curb line against the path without any kind of buffer or barrier. But with that, I guess I'd defer to Sasaki if they have anything else to add.
And I don't know if Kate is going to reply to that, but yeah, adding a 2-foot buffer is fine, especially, you know, if you get a pickup that backs up. The issue with parking is always the bed of a pickup backing up into a parking spot, and they're like 2 feet into the sidewalk. That's a condition that us civil engineers and the architects deal with all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you can fit, if Saki can fit some kind of buffer, 2 to 3 feet, that would be great. I highly recommend it. I don't want to belabor this any longer, but I do throw that out there for people to consider.
John Eric, your point is well taken, and I think all, you know, the points that Andy is making are also well taken, and I do believe this is something that we can solve in the construction documents phase, understanding that there is some need for parking, and that there is a desire for at least some of that to be head in, but also that there be a buffer to allow for safe passage of pedestrians and cyclists along the shared use path. So I believe that we can find a balance with some design study, and that this is something that we can continue to work through and explore together in the design, development, and construction documents phase.
Well, thank you very much. And my final comment about the grading is, if we do succeed in raising the cap of the bulkhead, and whether or not we get a ton of money completely out of anyone's expectation, you know, and any redesign to Sasaki's project right now, any redesign to raise a boardwalk a couple feet for all these walkways, it's easily accomplishable because of the way they have it designed. I mean, the sides of the shared use path right now are all earth-filled areas. So any changes to the bulkhead, the boardwalk, if we get lucky with a lot of money, then I would deal with Sasaki's changes of that later. I just throw that out. It should never be a showstopper that if we can raise the boardwalk now for some miraculous reason that we have money, that we don't stop Sasaki. We just give a change order to raise a couple feet. It's not a big deal. I like Sasaki's new entrance to the east lot. They narrowed the entrance. They got rid of the cobblestones. I like that. That was very smart. And I did look at the ferry wharfway. They did accommodate exactly what I asked for. That is very important for everyone in the city to understand that that sidewalk itself is a flow path of really intense flash floods. So we need to maintain that. We'll deal with that during the construction phase. That is it. So I'm very impressed with this rendition. As far as Kate's question, whether the ad hoc committee wants to bless the shared use path here, I actually didn't vote for the shared use path here. I like it back by the firehouse. So if this committee decides to discuss that, that's my opinion. Thanks for allowing me to provide some comments.
Thank you. Next is Councilor Z.
Thank you. I want to ask a question first. Maybe for Kate, can you just refresh me a little bit just to make sure my understanding is correct about the grades, but as it relates to any fill being brought in for environmental, for cleanup purposes. So early on in this committee, a lot of discussion was invested into what will it take and what will it cost to clean up the site and what will it look like because of presumed concerns. The NRA prior to dissolution had engaged with, there was a lot of history there, and it feels like that's gone a little bit off the side, which could be good. It could just mean that we understand it well and now we're good to go. But that's basically my question. Can you just refresh us on how this plan, specifically the grades, meshes with the concerns about the soils on the site to the extent that they're related?
Sure. Thanks so much for that question. It's a good one. The advice of our LSP, our soil professional, was really to minimize disturbance of the existing soils on site, which are more or less under a cap of parking as it exists today. And so what we're trying to do with this plan is minimize any digging that would happen in that zone and ensure that any fill that we're providing is good, clean fill that can further encapsulate those contaminated soils. So we minimize the need to bring any soils off-site or clean them. And instead, we're really ensuring that that soils can remain on site. Any digging that we do have to do for site footings, foundations, any trenching for utilities, we believe those soils could be accommodated underneath the areas of fill that we're proposing, still with several feet of clean soil to cap and ensure the safety of those areas.
Got it. So the long story short is we're just going over it. We're just going to keep
going
going
over
up
it, and
as
then,
much as we
yep, in
can.
areas where we do have to move it, we're going to bury it again
Got
under
it.
clean soils.
Okay.
Yep.
And as kind of a follow-up question,
Mhm.
what is our, degree of confidence that everybody will be happy on the state regulatory end with that idea? I only ask because we had a lot of challenges with the rail trail and continued, oh, go do more borings, and then you'd go do, and then they say, oh, go do more borings, and you do more borings, and it seemed very difficult to satisfy them. And it was sort of like, we won't tell you what to do. You have to tell us what you want to do, and then we'll tell you if it's right or wrong, which isn't, was difficult. So I just want to get a sense of sort of regulatory risk there that we are facing with this, that they would not be happy or force us into more costs that we weren't necessarily anticipating.
Kate, may I speak to that briefly?
Please, Andy. Yep.
If I could, I just, the general gist, I guess it's worth noting here, and obviously we'd experienced something a little bit different with the rail trail PCBs, but in this location here, I think that the summary that's worth noting is that there's a activities and use limitation on both the east and west lots. That was as Kate mentioned, what we have to have is essentially the LSP, the licensed site professional, needs to assist and oversee the removal of any of those soils that are within that contaminated, elevation below grade, and the backfilling that goes in there, essentially, and the cap. So as long as the LSP, essentially what the AOL requires is that as long as the LSP that we're hiring, who's certified and qualified to do so under state regs, monitors the process by which the contaminated soils are removed and backfilled or placed back in or disposed off site if necessary. There isn't a need to, say, go back to DEP for review of what needs to be done here. That's essentially summarized in the AOL, which is that there needs to be management of the contaminated soils on site. If there's a change in course, of some substantive nature, that may be an issue. But in here, based on what we're proposing to do, it's only down to that very minimal scope that is already addressed in the AOL, which is that an LSP just has to manage either keeping those materials on site and keeping them capped, or if they're being disposed of off site, doing that properly. And as Kate mentioned, we're minimizing that, especially as we go into the final design, details. We'll be minimizing those excavations, trenches and so forth, doing only the minimal excavations that we have to do.
Got it. Okay. So with those questions, thank you. That just was something I wanted to get a little confirmation a little bit for myself. So, Mr. Chair, to sort of your question at hand about, the resolution, my name is on it, so probably not surprisingly, I support it. And, I think that I have really read through kind of the sort of the remaining feedback points, but I still keep coming back to what you see in front of you right now on the screen is the best balancing of all of those things. I think that some of them I would put into a relatively minor bucket. Adding in more bike racks, I think, is feasible in the next stage of design. I think that refinement of some of the access is possible, but very conceptually, they're in the right place, and that we thought about all the places people need to get access to reasonably and have accommodated them sensibly. So, I wouldn't want to move the sort of the access. So that to me is the bar that I'm trying to reach in order to say, yes, I support the conceptual plan. So I think the Harbor Commission's points are taken, and if there's something, a swing needs to be a little bit bigger, or a space needs to be measured a little bit more, even if a few parking spaces need to be turned. But this picture is essentially what I would like to see personally built. And the one I want to address specifically is a shared use path location, because I suspect that if we don't talk about it tonight, it will certainly come up on the floor and potentially beyond that. I guess my whole thing with that is, what is really the intent of the shared use path? I think there's some differing opinions on that. I think some people view it as like a super highway for bikes in the park, and other people view it more for strolling and things like that. And I find myself more in the latter camp, despite being a cyclist myself. I would never ride my bike at speed down any of these things. I don't even ride my bike really on the rail trail, because there are always, I'm probably one of the people you pass walking with my kids at 1 mile an hour, and they're not paying attention, so they're all over the trail. So I look at this as, more of a way to transit through, but not necessarily like a highway where you're expecting to really be getting a workout or blazing through there. That's just my view, and I ride hundreds of miles a year myself, so I understand, cyclists want to have some of those things. So unless it's basically 4:30 in the morning, I'm personally not riding on these types of things. So I like where it is because I think that it actually kind of fits in nicely, and it opens up some other spaces. The curve, while it's kind of cool, I feel like you end up losing more space because you orphan some sort of weird space on the outside of the curve where you end up with these weird sort of small triangle shaped things. And then, yes, the inside space is a little bit more grand, but then I went down there and just stood there, on sort of the place where you would stand if you were watching a concert. And I just think when you're standing there, it also gives you a different feel than when you're looking at it on this picture. And to me, this still makes the most sense. So I'm prepared to make the motion whenever you want, and we can continue discussion, but I don't want to clip anybody off from this stage. So those are my thoughts, and look forward to hearing from others.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll hold on the motion for a minute. Richard Jones, the parking clerk, is next.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I want to make one quick comment. I came in late, pardon me. I did see John's 7 spaces. Heading in, certainly not parallel, makes a lot of sense to me. It's a very, very enjoyable space by residents, meaning that they, as John said, they pull up, park, and watch. And not everybody's ambulatory and is allowed to get out of their car. With respect to how close that is to the rail trail, we've had that issue before in other lots. We're dealing with it actually in the Hale Street lot right now. And Tony and company have come up with a nice solution, which is a wooden, large timbered fence, if you will, that prevents a car or truck from hanging over it. If that's not a possibility, then you certainly need a buffer of at least 3 feet. But that's all I had to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay. Councillor Shand.
Thank you, Chair. This one actually is probably more for Andy. What is the status of funding for the bulkhead? I know there were federal funds that we thought we were going to get, but I mean, to John Eric's point, I don't see us getting a boatload, but I mean, are we going to be able to get something done sooner rather than later?
Well, first of all, I'll note that we have Jordy Vining here, who's the project manager, and he could probably best speak to that. We have been working with the mayor and Nancy London have been working hard with us to try to secure funding outside. Obviously, we know a lot of federal money may or may not trickle down as needed. The bulkhead project, generally speaking, has been viewed, from what we can tell, favorably from some of the programs in terms of it being critical infrastructure. Whereas was a little bit less support from what we could tell thus far to have those federal funds come down and support the park, maybe seen as more as a soft amenity. So there is some strong, I think, potential here to get that bulkhead project done in the next couple of years. Obviously recognizing we have to bid and do the construction, but Jordy, could you speak to that more specifically?
Yes. Yeah, at this point, the conceptual cost estimate for the project is around $4.3 million. So it's a significant project for Newburyport, and we do not have existing grants for that are allocated towards this project. We have a little bit of money in the account for the design and construction administration and that sort of thing. But we're going to have to do a significant push to try to secure state and federal grants. So we've been having those conversations, but it's difficult. There's no way to provide any guarantees of whether those grant programs are going to be interested and how much they might fund and how much they would be looking to the city for a match. So we'll be diving into that in 2-3 months from now.
And just to add to that, Councillor Shand, Senator Markey and Senator Warren have put in $2.4 million for the bulkhead project in their new earmarks, but it's been through 2 positive reviews to date. But it's difficult to know because it's difficult with what's going on in Congress right now. So I'm hoping that, as things move forward with this infrastructure plan that we will, or bill that hopefully will get passed, that we can begin to see some of this money drop towards that. And then there is also the Seaport Economic Advisory Council that we received money last time for phase 1 from the state 10 years ago. So those are 2 buckets that we're looking at. And then, of course, with, talking to the state and the significant increase in revenues this year, and the fact that they're starting to really review some of the requests regarding projects like this in the legislature, that hopefully we'll start to see some movement in terms of additional grants.
Thank you, Mayor. If I could I appreciate all the comments, Jordy, Andy, and Mayor Holliday. Thank you very much. I do have one comment. I just wanted to reiterate what Councilor Zeid mentioned regarding the bike path. I too bike, and I think the location of this is, I don't see anybody speeding through here. I think it would be inappropriate, but I think the location is basically where people agreed. And I think over 1,000 people put in comments during the summer, and this is what Sasaki came up with. And I think it's going to be a nice spot for the bike path. I think it's going to work out quite well. So I too will be the one supporting this moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Next is Councilor McCauley.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of things. First of all, again, I'll reiterate, as everyone has, I think Sasaki has come back with something more reflective of the things that we've been talking about for a while. I do just want to make a couple of comments. I do appreciate the areas of additional themes that they have pointed out, particularly the bike racks. I would like to probably suggest having an area for the bike racks as opposed to sprinkling them through the park. They tend to be obstacles that way, as opposed to let's say a larger area that could be designated as as a biking area, etc. for biking. But that's my opinion. The restroom alignment, glad to see that it's still on the table. I understand a number of things that are under investigation there. I would add to that the alignment to the street and the river. Again, it's parallel to the street, meaning it blocks view corridors from Water Street and Merrimack Street, in this case, as well as Green Street coming down. The orientation it is today would add more obstacle to a view corridor. So changing that alignment would be my recommendation on that. The shared use path, I know it's at 10 feet. I was in consideration. I know that the boardwalk is 16 feet, and I think in retrospect, if we had to do over, we might have done that at 20 feet or more. Thinking back, I would suggest that as we proceed, if we can widen the shared use path to 12 or 15 or so, I think it's going to be heavily used in the congregated area, and I think that it will only grow in time. And this leads me to the comment about from the previous NRA proposal, where it did more of a loop up through closer to the firehouse. I think at the time that was a very good break from traditional thinking, and I think that but I think this has evolved a little bit. Let me tell you why. With the NRA proposal in that loop, what we found is that the embayment, the crane location, and the fish pier became isolated. So what would be needed would be mini connections built in there to satisfy those needs. I think the current location of the shared path accommodates a true multi-dimensional access points that are needed here. So and without a lot of extra infrastructure. What we see here in front of us is our grids that contain expansive park space, green space, etc. I saw that the one of the comments from the Waterfront Trust was that they had a question about how could they leverage areas to do functional events like more theater in the park or small type of gathering enclaves, etc. I think this type of setup, the way it's built right, the way it's designed or proposed right now, would allow us that future growth. We might want to second guess where we plant some trees or so, but that's down the road here. I think this setup and this design allows us, the city, more flexibility to utilize those spaces going forward. So that being said, I too conceptually would support this and move it forward. I don't I'm assuming afterwards, and this is a question I think for you, the chair, is when do we get more public comment? Is it after we bring it back to the council and have more public comment? And the next phase of this is where does our current scope with Sasaki end, and where does a new one begin, right? Especially in that timeline.
Thank you. Well, I'm the last, I think, do other non-voting members wish to comment before I go last as a voting member?
Well, this is Andy. Could I speak? Just relative to the contract with Sasaki, just so you'll all understand where we are.
Sure.
We have the tasks, essentially tasks 1 through 9 in the contract. The tasks 1 through 6 are really leading through to the schematic design.
Yeah.
Tasks 7 through 9, 7 is for the final design. That is, requires a couple of months. Obviously, that's the key one. That's the next step for us that we need the funding for. The assumption here is that NRA revenues that came to the city would be used to pay for that now. The task 8 is the bidding process and assisting us with that portion. And then task 9 is the construction administration. So we have basically bid for the design purposes. We bid this such that we could extend Sasaki's contract to allow the remaining portion of the work that's needed to be done if we were satisfied with their work, which I would venture to say we are. But it's that task 7 that's needed here.
Thank you.
Hey, Jared,
Okay.
Jared, it's Matt. I know there's been a couple of references to the Waterfront Trust this evening. Would it be appropriate if I just took a quick minute?
Please.
Okay. First of all, it's important for us to go on record to say that we've thought long and hard about a lot of this stuff, discussed it, engaged, and we voted unanimously at our last meeting to support this latest design, and it's important for us to go on record stating that. Look, we understand and appreciate so many variables and the constraints and what goes into trying to create something like this, knowing that it's impossible to make everybody happy. It's just physically impossible. And it comes down to trade-offs and priorities, and we're comfortable that the things that needed to be put on the table have been put on the table and vetted. And as a result, again, we're willing to accept this design. I mean, clearly, there are a couple of things. I mean, if we had like a beam me down Scotty Star Trek thing where we could just move the docks, for winter storage anywhere we wanted to, we would beam them someplace other than the park. And I think we all would agree to that. We understand and appreciate the costs or the risks of doing that. And as a result, while it's not optimal, we are clearly willing to accept, are comfortable accepting the current proposed location, which then opens up just one other thing that we want to say is that, since that location will be sitting there for the vast majority of the year unused, because it's only for a limited period during the winter, that's our feeling that might be a logical place for Sasaki and the committee to take a look at, can we do something to make that area available for beer fest or whatever, something of a theater, not putting anything there, permanently structured, but an area that could be easily and readily converted into, use during the, summer months. So we would just want to, throw that out there for consideration. There's a variable that was brought up that we weren't asked to necessarily consider, but after the fact has been brought up about raising the bulkhead cap. I just want to make sure that everybody understands that. Look, I mean, our primary, focus on that is, look, to do things and then duplicate or remove things down the path, doesn't make any sense. But we think to be doing something to protect against what might happen, a generation or two forward, and materially impact the view from all this energy being put into it is just our concern. And our concern isn't so much the raising of the cap up to the level of that wooden rail. Our concern would be something that would impact the view for those that would be perhaps sitting on benches and things like that. And so, clearly, to the extent that things can be designed that can be reasonably cost effectively augmented in the future, is worthy of consideration in our mind. And personally, one thing I'd add is, this whole arena of weather and climate and raising tides, I think we haven't seen even the beginning or the tip of the iceberg of the technologies and the things that are going to be coming our way. And so I'd like us to at least consider that, the next 10 to 20 years, there might be some solutions that may arise that may be better solutions for us than doing things today. So anyways, I'm just going to end with that and thank everybody for their time and energy, because this isn't easy, and there's been a lot gone into this, and again, we're delighted to support this plan as presented.
Thank you. I especially want to thank Matt for recognizing the effort that's brought us to this point, October 7th, 2021. So before I talk on the substance, I do want to talk about the process, because also Councilor McCauley asked about public input. I firmly believe we've given ample opportunity, and it's helped us. We've gotten a better design as a result for public input. Until the city council actually votes on the conceptual plan, we have public comment that can come into the city council, and every city councilor reads every email. I can guarantee you that. And there'll be 2 minutes of public comment before the council. But I just want to sort of bring us back to reality of how much input and thoughtfulness has gone into what you're seeing on your screen. And I dare say you're not going to be able to get more input than we've solicited. Is 100% of the world happy with this? No, but that we know is impossible. There are minimal issues of conflict. Now I'll get to the substance. So there are some who are very adamant about going back to the loop design, which was the intention of what we called in our resolution in 2017, the Ulig-Sidford-Cow-Port design, because we actually had 3 conceptual designs, not one. It's not true that it was just one. It was 3. And, we basically had consensus there. And at the time, there was this idea of a loop. But Councilor McCauley is absolutely correct that since we've dived into this and hired highly qualified, respectful, thoughtful, experienced firm to help us with this, and this body, which has 5 counselors, the maximum number out of 11 that you can have, plus 10 ex officio members from all the important stakeholders. We took public comment. I believe I took it every meeting. We gave direction and decided that it should go down here, the shared path, down by the embayment. Not only do I think that that's the right decision, but I think it would be absolutely criminal to revisit that at this late stage. You would basically be scrapping everything we did this year. It's just, on balance, it's the right move. I think you heard that from many of the people who've been working on this committee. I know it may be frustrating that it doesn't have the elegance of the sort of swoop design when you're looking from on high, but there's a reason that we did it this way, and it's the right reason. And now to get to comments from ship captains, I think the presentation tonight really helped reemphasize that we are not going to shut out fishermen. It was never the intent. One of the reasons why it's so hard to get to this point is there are so many different users that need to be accommodated. And I know Captain Letourneau in his written comments was concerned that maybe fishing boats were not considered, and that's simply not true. They were from the outset, and we were working very closely with Paul Hogg and continue to do so. And I feel that it has been demonstrated beyond a shadow of a doubt. We're going to have fire access that our fire chief has certified to get down to the embayment if necessary. We're going to be able to get those fuel trucks in and out of the harbor master facility. Just even if we never succeed in reopening Lower Custom House Way, which is a possibility, who knows? We are talking on a municipal scale of time, which is a century, basically. Just like with sea level rise, we have to think in terms of a century. This is not a business where we think of a 3-year return or something. We're in this for the long haul. So I hope we can comfort the fishing community that they are heard, they have been accounted for, and this plan, I believe, accommodates them while still satisfying all the other goals we have. When it comes to bicycles, and I guess this would be more Rick Tainer's written comments. I think this is a fundamental issue, and it was raised by several of the councilors tonight. When there are crowds down here, you are not going to be able to fly through on your bicycle. We talked about this early on, and as I say, it would be criminal to throw that out now. That really has been an assumption of what we've envisioned in this park, and that's going to disappoint some. And that it's time to make a decision. And I don't think we should go back on the decision we already made. As to the width, I do think Sasaki could maybe explain a little bit better that that this 10-foot width is not just 10 feet straight, but there's also a shoulder. But it's valid to ask, can this width be 12 feet or 13 feet? I don't think this, by voting on this tonight, we're condemning ourselves to just 10 feet and never talk about it again. Other issues of controversy, bike racks I really don't see as a controversy. This is a conceptual plan. Bicycle racks are not sort of fundamental infrastructure. They are things that we can add without doing violence to the plan you see on the screen. Of course, we want, if people need to lock up their bike, then we'll accommodate that. I also don't think it's a budget breaker. So it's not like saying, oh, you left out the merry-go-round or the skating rink. We can do this. What else was I going to say? On the restroom and visitor kiosk, I don't know whether that's going to be controversial when we get to the full council, but speaking for myself, I understand this has been a long-standing bone of contention with the Committee for an Open Waterfront of what that building is going to be. But at this stage, really all you have when you look at it is a pretty small footprint. It doesn't even cover the whole area that today has the cornhole games. I don't see any preclusion, as Councilor McCauley said, to rotating the building 90 degrees if when we get to schematic design and we discover that it blocks views. I personally don't see that it will block views. I know I pay a very close attention to the Green Street view, for example, from when I was on the ZBA, and I voted for that expansion of what is now the Black Cow. That was very much on our mind, and I got beat up for that, rightfully so. But I think it worked out okay. This building, I really disagree that it could possibly block the view, but we don't have to settle that tonight. That's the beauty of it. Just like we don't have to settle exactly how many bicycle racks we have and where they're gonna go. On the head end, parking over by Summerbee Sculpture Park. I support that. I think it's a good idea. I haven't heard anyone oppose it. But again, there are sort of design niceties that we don't need to settle and really shouldn't settle at conceptual plan level. We'll figure it out, about the head end and, can we really do 7? Will they be deep enough? That we'll get there. It's not as if when we go to schematic design, if we find we can't do it at all, or we can only do 5, that we'd have to come back and vote again on the conceptual plan. I don't think that's a material difference. Rick Tanner also raised in his letter sort of some frustration with the idea that, we were going to eliminate parking on the waterfront. Well, not exactly. That isn't actually how things came out in 2017 when the city council adopted a resolution. And I think this group, I didn't hear anyone question that tonight. I mean, we seem to have a good compromise here. You have a substantial parking lot on the east, so it can serve city institutions like the Custom House that don't have their own parking. And we still know that we need some parking on the west. And Parking Clerk Jones's comment that not everyone is mobile and they really do have to enjoy the waterfront from their car is well taken. That's a fact. So I am very happy with this plan. I would entertain a motion to recommend approval of Order 284, which I'll put up on the screen. I would suggest one adjustment, which is we should probably reference the plans that were presented tonight. That's it. So hold on, if I could please share the resolution, put up on the screen for the counselors. Hold on. Where is the order? I got too many things open. Yeah, there it is. All right. This is the resolution. The whereas clauses simply acknowledge the work that's been done. And there's a blank, assuming we have a positive vote tonight. I added tonight's date so that we have the plans in the budget for tonight. I added the word and recognize that the proposal from Councilor Zeid and myself would be to even go so far as to put our money where our mouth is at the council on the 20% design, so we can start on the schematic, but we don't have that number yet. So I recognize that. With that, Councilor Zeid.
Yeah, I want to make the motion with the amendments you have, and just one other minor suggestion, and that is in Exhibit A, we sought to provide some information, so we should probably, for posterity, update the link so that the latest information is on record. And we had this link is to the 916 plan, and to the extent that there are some minor changes, I just want everything to be buttoned up. And I'm comfortable leaving the no amount in it, but it would be nice if we could have that, for the meeting. I don't know, maybe Andy could say when we would be able to get that number, but I think it goes part and parcel. I mean, if we're moving forward, we're moving forward, and I would like to, to get the money with it so that it kind of signifies a closure to this and allows us to continue the process. So that's a motion, sorry.
Yeah, is there a second on the motion?
Okay.
Second.
Okay, second. Okay, so second by Councilor McCauley and Councilor Shand eventually. Okay, any debate? And again, just because you're a non-voting member doesn't mean you cannot participate in the debate. You just can't vote. So I'll recognize anybody who wishes to speak, as long as I can find the right button to do it. Hold on. Anyone else want to raise a hand? Not seeing any hands.
Chair Eigenman, this is Andy.
Yeah.
Okay. My only concern is that I appreciate everyone's effort, including the discussion of the order for approval of the schematic plan and also approval for funding for continued design. My only concern is just looking at with the contract that we had established with Sasaki and the process we had followed to date. The 20% design and 75% design thresholds aren't necessarily consistent with that. And I don't know if there's a particular benefit that's achieved by having only 20% done and then moving to the next phase. But my only concern
Well,
there
what do we have in their contract? How about that?
the contract refers to a 75% and a 100%. And my concern there is, in addition to that, is just that there'll be additional costs if we're incrementally doing the design as opposed to doing it in one chunk. And again, I would defer to Sasaki if they want to speak to that further, but as designers, but my concern would just be additional costs that would result from the uncertainty of how much further we're going to be going and then adding time frame to that.
Okay, well then let me direct the question so we can be efficient. And I see John Eric's hand, and I'll call on him in a minute. So 75%, again, it's not 75% of the construction budget. It's 75% of the design contract. So Kate, what ballpark number are we talking about? We have what in hand, Andy? Something like $500,000 on hand. Is that right?
Yeah, a little less than that. That's correct. And
Okay.
yeah, we haven't yet seen the number from Sasaki.
Kate, so what is your guesstimate?
Jared, I apologize. We're waiting on proposals from our sub-consultants to give a final number to the city. But as Andy said, we are preparing a proposal that would reflect our work and our sub-consultants' work for a 75% submission to you all and a 100% submission. Adding that additional submission of a 20% design milestone where we pause and we work with you all to get approvals is typically extra time on the order of 6 weeks to 2 months potentially, as well as additional cost associated with the labor of both ourselves and our sub-consultants to provide that additional milestone for you. So as Andy said, I think we would highly recommend to the city the efficiency of releasing the design team for the full construction documents, which would still include several points of touch point with you all to ensure that we're on the right track and that our design documents are reflecting the desires and opinions of this committee.
Okay.
Does that answer your question, Jared?
Well, almost. I had two questions. So first of all, given you don't have to express it in a dollar amount because you don't have your information from your subs. I understand that. I'm just trying to get an order of magnitude, of what percentage of the construction budget would be that would go to a designer. That's all.
Yeah, so a project of this scale and complexity, typically the landscape architecture, which is inclusive of sub-consultants to design the park, would be around 10%.
Okay. All right.
And so, and that's for the design of the park. As you know, we've budgeted for the design of the visitor center and restrooms separately. We've provided a separate number to you all for that. And because of the scale of that and its relative complexity, based on its scale, the percentage fee is generally higher for a piece of architecture that's that customized and small. So I would expect something more like 13 to 14% fee on that. And so again, we're working to refine those numbers. We're going to keep it as tight as possible because we understand the desire of the city to be efficient with the design fee. But I think it's really important that the committee recognize that an additional design milestone and submission with you all will push that fee upwards of 11 to 12% for the park area.
Okay. All right. Before I go to other members, so I see I'm going to go John Eric, then Jim McCauley, then Councilor Zede. Last question is customarily, or is there a pattern of what percentage cutoffs you've done for projects like this? So in your, Cincinnati was a much more expensive, but did you do a 20%, a 50%, or just jump to the 75? What have you done historically?
Good question. It really depends on the municipality. A lot of municipalities have this pretty well codified, especially within their parks departments. we typically do anywhere from 2 to 3 milestone submissions after a schematic submission, like what this is. So honestly, a 20% submission is really essentially what we've done, but turned into black and white. I wouldn't expect too much more detail, but we would spend quite a bit of time converting drawings to an official set. Whereas we can spend that time and provide a more detailed submission to you at 75%.
Understood.
We often do 60, 90, and 100, Jared, for other entities, but it really depends on the municipality.
I got it. That's helpful. All right, I'll stop grilling you. John Eric White, you're next.
Thanks. I just want to clear the air. I was actually surprised that Kate was, when she was summarizing the public's comments and how it was like a 50-50 split about the bike path location and all that, and that, she offered that if this ad hoc committee were to want to take a look at it, let's take a look at it. So I opened up and spoke and said, hey, my original thought was to keep it away from where it is now. I retract that. And I was waiting to see if other people were strongly opinionated about it, because I can't imagine changing the plan the way it is now. So I was surprised that we were going to go there. So my final answer is I have no gray area for that location. The only, if there is any gray area, it's let's try to see how the bike path goes for a couple of years. If bikers are going too fast and they do not dismount, we put up a sign right at the trailheads. No big deal. Please dismount. I was only concerned about driving through real fast. I think Councilor Zeed and Councilor Macaulay very detail expressed exactly how I feel. And most people aren't going to ride through it. That was my original concern. I think we have control over that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John Eric. Councilor Macaulay?
Yeah, I just put my hand up to see if you needed a friendly amendment to change the 75, the 20 and percentages to 75 and 100.
That's up to Councilor Zeed.
May I speak, Chair?
Yeah, you're on.
Yeah, so I did want to address the sort of the intent behind this and why it was written this way. So I think we're all celebrating tonight what I think has been a good process, right? And when I think about why has it been a good process, and it's because we've gone kind of slow and fast at the same time. I mean, obviously in the greater context, this is super slow. It's been like a million years we've been talking about a park, but in the context, we've been really diligent about taking in, feedback every step of the way. And my experience with these projects from where I sit is that 75% is essentially complete. In the grand scheme of things, the difference between 75 and 100 is minimal from the perspective of a typical resident. For example, they would be things that a designer would see or an engineer would see, but not anything that a resident would typically notice. But the difference between 0 and 75 is ginormous. So the 20% was tried, doesn't have to be 20%, but I do think that there's value in coming back at some point. And so the way I would answer this is really, now that I'm thinking about this more, is really thinking about what does it really mean from a number perspective. So you're hearing 10, 11, 12. So here's where my head is. I say, if this is an $8 million project, which is a number we seem to bat around at times and looking back at some of so 10% is 800. So we already have one problem, and that's that there is an 800 in the NRA funds that came out. So that's an issue. That's not what I was anticipating when we wrote this up and we sponsored it. I think the thought was we would have enough money in the NRA, let's call it NRA residual funds, to cover this, but that doesn't seem to be the case. So before we can even debate about whether we want to spend an extra 1 or 2% to allow for an additional design submittal and whether that would be valuable to anybody, we probably should figure out how we're going to pay for the first part of it. And I know we're kind of putting Sasaki on the spot because they haven't finished with their subs, but even the ballpark numbers are not penciling right now. So we have a problem. And I don't know, Chair, how we should solve this, or if we should go to the floor if we don't know.
No, I do have a suggestion. I know we've been at it for an hour and 43 minutes, but I actually have some clarity on this, I think. First, it's the building. it's the building that actually is kind of skewing things. You also heard from Kate, the design fees for the building are also disproportionate. It's the building that's tripping us up and making the numbers not work. So I would suggest two things. First of all, I think 20% is too low because basically that's what we have. It's taking the conceptual plan and making it black and white. I think we can all agree that doesn't add value. So 20% is not the right number. 70%, in your argument is, and I don't want to have, you're the sponsoring counselor, and I don't want to drag this out. But Kate suggested 60% as something we can at least take to the floor. We can at least take to the floor at the council. And I would also assume it omits the building. I mean, we still have, that's one of those open issues we have. Remember is, what's the building going to look like? And I don't want the building to be slowing us down on 60% design of the park. What do you think of that?
So 60% is friendly, and we're both sponsors, you and I. So I'm happy to accept it as a friendly. But and for us to send this out of committee. But I suggest that we need to perhaps you and I as sponsors or whomever get with Andy and Ethan and figure out, and the mayor, of course, and figure out where are we going to pull the funds from, because
I got you.
Get the building
Can I
out, I'm
clarify
still
one
not
piece?
sure where we are. Yeah. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
just to clarify one piece, councilors, that 10% that I just threw out there, it does include the schematic design fee, which you have already spent, and the results of that have been on display in the last 2 meetings. And so, so there isn't an additional 10%, that the design fee you've already spent is included in that. So the additional fee is somewhat less than what I think you might imagine it would be.
Okay, well, that's encouraging.
That helps with your sort of back of the envelope.
Yeah. Sorry, my mind always, I always do the numbers quick. So in number 2, then, Chair, I would say we can amend the 20% to 60%. And then it seems to me that the second one can become 90. I mean, that seems to be, and then once we have numbers, when we debate it on the floor, we can have an argument about where the value is, and maybe Sasaki can provide us a number with and without that 60%. Maybe we do option 1 is 60, 90, 100, and the other one's 75 and 100, and the councilors can decide, hey, the money is worth it or it's not worth it, and that could be a floor debate. But I'm comfortable changing it to 60 and 90 in number 2 in this committee right now as a friendly.
All right, Councilor McCall, are you okay with that?
Yeah, I'm great. I just wanted to move it along. Thank you.
Yeah.
If I could, just to the sponsors and to the counselors, I do suggest, obviously, we follow up with Ethan, and just in terms of procurement, I just want to make sure we're not running afoul of how we had procured this originally. I wouldn't want to have to go out to do a whole RFP again to just end up, following through with Sasaki or some other designer to do this work. So
I understood. We're just trying to get this out of committee. We're just trying to get, part of there's obviously intense interest in this project with all 11 counselors. I actually had, I was asked by one counselor if I would notice tonight's meeting as committee of the whole, which I did not do, because we have to finish our work as this committee. It's just not efficient to just, have 11 counselors working on this right now. So please bear with us. We don't have the number yet, but I think we have consensus on a 60, 90. That's now in the motion, and we're going to refer also to tonight's drawings, and we're going to fix the link so that it refers to the both presentations, not just September 16th. Does everyone understand what we're voting on?
Can you show the resolution again?
Sure.
And yes, I do understand what we're voting on. Just wanted to see it.
Yeah, hold on a sec.
Counselor, are those submissions binding once this team votes on them?
No.
The submission percentages, or is that
No.
something? that's still being revisited?
That's my point.
Okay.
It's not
Thank you.
binding. This is a recommendation.
Yep.
The city council is the only body that can lock this in,
Okay.
and we're not there yet. We got 6 other counselors to talk to, and I
Understood.
think, and also Councilor Zeed, who's a co-sponsor with me, of this, has already said, we could change it to 75 and 100. So we may end up doing that. I think it's going to be helpful to give you more time to sharpen your pencil and tell us how much more money it's going to cost for 75%. And then we can also talk about, including or excluding the building. All of those things will be handled on the floor of the full council. We have time.
Thank you.
Councilor Z.
So I just wanted to ask a follow-up to that. So our next meeting is next Tuesday. I can't imagine that's soon enough. So I think we planning to vote on this to bring it out on October 25th. Is that a sensible
That's where
expectation?
I'm headed. I think so. I think I'm headed to that because I want to give Kate enough time. I want to give Ethan Manning enough time. Because that, I mean, I don't want to go much past that though. You know, we're going to hit Thanksgiving, Christmas, session is over, and you know, change of administration, council changes. You follow me?
I'm good. Thank you very much.
John Eric White.
Real quick, I just want to make sure that the councilors are aware that I've been doing construction projects put out to bid for 3 decades plus.
Yep.
And when Kate puts together a proposal, I'm supporting whatever she puts together, and I'm just kind of throwing it out there that we all need to be aware that a lot of times the funding is not in sync with the percent deliverable. So 60% design does not mean you spent 60% of the budget. The joke that we have internally with engineers is, 50% of the design budget is going from 90 to 100% design. And I don't know if that makes sense to many of you, but
Yeah, it does. It does, John.
Okay, because that's the reality. That's the reality.
Yeah, and also, I mean, that's why it's been vital to have you, on this, and also why we have Kim Turner, the chair of our Parks Commission.
Yeah,
absolutely. We hear you.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
it's just, we're not gonna be able to solve it tonight.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay. Counselor Shand, I don't even know if my share screen is working. Is it working?
It is. Yes, I can see
Okay.
it. Thank you.
All right. I gotta toggle back so I know who's talking and all that good stuff. Anyone else before we vote?
Just on that document, Jared, I think you also need to fix the words. You fixed the numbers, but the words are written next to them, just the Scrivener's thing.
The words are not written next to them.
You wrote it, you changed it to 60%, but to the left of it, it says in words 20%. So just to make the words and the numbers the same.
Right, okay, I got it. I just changed it. And I'm gonna change the, I don't have the URL yet, but I will. I just don't have it yet.
Yeah.
So I'll change the URL. Okay, I'm gonna do roll call. On the motion, Counselor Z,
Yes.
Counselor Shand,
Yes.
Counselor McCauley,
Yes.
and I'm a yes. All right, great. I really want to thank everyone. This is exciting, make no mistake, but also I want to say, I believe that this committee, both voting members and non-voting members, have a high degree of confidence in the work of Sasaki Associates. And that has really made a difference. I just want to say that on the record. How about a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Hold on.
Yeah.
So we voted on the amendment. Don't we have to vote on the order to bring it out?
Oh, well, I thought it was a friendly amendment, but that's okay. We can do that.
Okay. Okay, that's fine. No.
No. I don't want there to be any ambiguity in the record. We'll vote again. So as amended, on the resolution of the full council, Counselor Z,
Yes.
Counselor Shand,
Yes.
Counselor McCauley,
Yes.
Counselor Igerman votes yes. Thank you. Okay, how about now? Are we done?
Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Counselor Z,
Yes.
Counselor Shand,
Yes.
Counselor McCauley,
Yes.
and I vote yes. Thank you again, everyone. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, everyone. Great
Good night.
job.